to the, elder statesman on the experience.
I can
We've got it sorted.
I did change BAR because I looked at some minutes and was looking for something from my apprentice. And actually, she's like, you chair the BAR. I'm like,
Y'all ready? All righty.
how do they allow me to do that?
They've got some good questions for you.
All right, let's get started. It is 5:34 according to that clock. Welcome to this regular monthly meeting of the Charlottesville Board of Architectural Review. Staff will introduce each item, followed by the applicant's presentation, which should not exceed 10 minutes. The chair will then ask for questions from the public, followed by questions from the BAR. After questions are closed, the chair will ask for comments from the public. For each application, members of the public are each allowed 3 minutes to ask questions and 3 minutes to offer comments. We'd like to ask everybody to please speak from the podium over there. Speakers shall identify themselves and provide their address. Comments should be limited to the BAR's purview, that is, regarding only the exterior aspects of the project. Following the BAR's discussion and prior to taking action, the applicant will have up to 3 minutes to respond. Alrighty. Our first agenda item is actually Tyler Whitney has moved on up to Boston, so we need a new co-chair or vice chair. Do we have David? Great candidate.
I understand I came at the wrong time.
We're looking for a vice chair.
Does anybody have any interest in serving as vice chair?
I think David just says yes. He shook his will like this.
I'll do it.
Okay.
Sure, shrug, hadn't seen that.
I typically do make the meeting, so it's not like I'm often absent, but if you'd be happy to,
Sure.
we'd love to have you. So do I hear a motion
So moved.
and a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Congratulations, Mr. Vice Chair.
Yay.
Alrighty. Let the record show Mr. Timmerman has been elected as the Vice Chair. All right, our next agenda item are matters from the public that are not on our agenda or on the consent agenda. Do we have any matters from the public that are not on our agenda?
I'm looking for participants, attendees.
We have 2 attendees on Zoom at the moment. If you'd like to speak at this time, click the raise hand icon, or you can press *9 if you're joining us via telephone.
I think they're both involved in projects.
Yes,
James.
no raise hands at this time.
You want to bounce back and just some quick intros? would be-
Oh, yes. Thank you. Good call. We do have some new members to the BAR. Jerry Rosenthal's over here. He's the owner of a historic property in the downtown historic district.
Correct.
And Kate Tabany? Yes. Was just appointed last night by city council. She's got a conflict this evening, so won't be able to sit up here with us, but we welcome both of our 2 new members. Thank you guys for agreeing to join our happy band.
And as a commercial to, we have Mr. Gastinger's term is up at the end of the year. We'll be looking for a landscape architect. So get out there and shake the bushes.
Sounds good.
And
They fall out of the trees or the bushes somewhere.
The downtown mall trees.
Yeah. Well, we'll have some good candidates later. All right, I'm assuming we don't have any other matters from the public not on the agenda. All right, our next item is the consent agenda. Do we have any members who would like to move anything off of the consent agenda? The items on the consent agenda are the meeting minutes from May of this year, 0 Park Street, and 627 Cabell Avenue.
Shoot. I didn't realize that Cabell Avenue was on the consent agenda. I wanted to remove one of staff's recommended conditions, or at least discuss that.
Okay.
And I don't
Let's remove it from the
Okay.
consent agenda.
feel bad doing that.
No, that's okay. That's why we got a process. All right, so the consent agenda will currently consist of the meeting minutes from May 21st and 0 Park Street. Any other requests to take either of those off?
just to make clear, the motion to accept the consent agenda is a motion to accept the recommended approval as noted by staff for 0 Park Street, and that, includes the bracketed last part of the sentence. Just to be clear, BAR approves the request, so.
That is an item that
That's
we've
clear.
seen several times before and just basically been revised a few times.
I move to accept the consent agenda as amended.
Second?
All right, I'll just call for a board vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, the consent agenda passes to include May 21st meeting minutes and 0 Park Street. All right.
Caleb's online, so let me, you can elevate him to participant. Call that up. So, and this came in as a building permit request and got circled back to me. This is 627 Cabell Avenue. It's in the Rugby Road, University Circle, Venable Neighborhood, ADC District. It's a 1930s house. This is an addition onto the rear addition to the 1930s house. We're not sure when it was constructed. It's after the 1960s. What you're looking up in the top left is looking north, so the 1930 section on the right, and then the addition to the left. And the new porches will be added around the back side, which would be the north elevation of that rear addition. Nothing in this is problematic. The materials are fine, location is fine. There are, I will note, some questions about the setback that need to be resolved with zoning. So to be clear, approval of the design is not a clearance of any zoning setback issues. And there's a couple of conditions that I recommended, 4 of them. And if you had any question about them, you can discuss them with Caleb. I know or online. Caleb, are you there?
I am, yes, sir.
All right, so, Mr. Zemer.
All righty, let's see. So first, do we have any questions from the public? Or actually, does he present first? Sorry.
Ken, that might be best to just get your questions for him.
Sure. All right, any questions from the public? Okay. Any questions from the BAR?
Yeah. So my question was, staff has recommended a condition that the deck boards be tight fit with no gaps. And I just wanted to make sure that that was okay with you. My understanding is if they're tightly fit, like a tongue and groove flooring, you'd have to find a way to drain the deck, potentially slope it. And I don't know just want to confirm that was okay with you. It's not I don't think to me, this doesn't seem like a necessary requirement.
And I was falling back on, when people have asked about Trex, and that's been our standard. I agree, this is not in a location, it's not something I need to replicate a historic porch, but if it were spaced, that's fine with me, and Caleb can certainly answer.
Yeah, my input on that would be simply that the fastener system occasionally requires some spacing, but I understood from the BAR's requirement that we would be using square edge boards. Is that correct?
That's part of the condition that's been written.
So that being the case, we would only have a very, very small, like 1/8 inch max expansion requirement between the boards. We still have a code requirement, it's my understanding, for a slope away from the building. It'd be very minimal, so it would not be, specifically for watershed. But we could definitely accommodate a very minimal gap between the boards.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my question was really if you guys are okay with staff's condition or not. And if it's, I think, what you're describing sounds fine to me, but,
Yes, I
again,
have
just
no
want to make sure
objections
that
at
was,
all.
okay, all right. I'm good. Move on.
All right, would you like to make a motion?
Well, do we want to, do we even
right,
have any
sorry.
public? I know it's going through emotions, but.
Right. Sorry, comments from the public. Comments from the BAR.
I can go ahead and make a motion.
Okay.
Having considered the standards set forth in the city code, including ADC district design guidelines, I move to find the proposed two-story porch at 627 Cabell Avenue satisfies the BAR's criteria and is compatible with this property and other properties in this ADC district, and the BAR approves the request with the conditions as recommended by staff.
Second?
All right, we'll call a vote. Mr. Timmerman?
Aye.
Ms. Lewis?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
Yes.
Mr. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Gastinger?
Aye.
Mr. Rosenthal?
Yes.
And the chair votes aye. Motion passes.
Quickly. All right, Caleb, you're all set.
Wonderful. Is there any other reason I need to stay on here?
Pure entertainment, you're welcome.
Excellent.
Got nothing else to do.
Have a good night.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Um,
All right, so we're now moving to new items. First item is certificate of appropriateness for 809 Locust Avenue.
And Julie's online. Remy, if you can elevate her. So this is 809 Locust Avenue. It is within a conservation district and as you all know, much lighter touch on things within an HC district. We are primarily looking at changes that are visible from the street. So given the grade of this and the distance from the road, we're looking at this front elevation. The house is circa 1947. It is contributing to the district. However, it really needs to stress that the exterior has been altered significantly since the survey was done. So you can see the 2010, the photo from the city survey then, and then a more recent photograph. I would have likely had this as consent. I'm not sure I would have been comfortable. Well, I could have had a consultant or consultation with the chair on it, but I elevated it because it is a little bit unique. I thought it would be helpful with our two new members to see a couple things. So Julie, forgive me for using you as to help demonstrate the BAR process here, but staff has no issues with it. Yeah, so.
All righty.
Well, do you all, I'm sorry, I know we're dealing remotely, but do you all have any questions for me about what we're showing here and what's the rationale for my recommendation? Essentially, the building's been so altered that this additional alteration, in fact, it actually makes the building look nicer, so.
I think it does too.
Sorry,
Right, so-
Julie.
I guess would the applicant like to make any other comments or a presentation of any sort? Julie?
Sorry. I wrote in my narrative description, but I'll reiterate it here, that our belief is that this gives this house a much stronger street presence. And what it's attempting to do is actually work with this, what do we call this style? Spanish, California, something. So we're trying to stay within that language, and we're doing that with the use of clay tiles and the stucco exterior that the current house has. So in a way, we feel like we're beefing that up a little bit with this addition, and the increased and frankly more appropriate scale of that center volume, I think will really improve its relationship to the street and the surroundings. And it is very simple architecturally, but we're hoping in the details to really enhance those, the personality of a Spanish California style that might set that house apart in a nice way.
Okay, thank you. I think maybe mission style, is that the right term? I think.
Maybe,
Um,
maybe.
yeah.
I think some fun putting it.
Alrighty. Do we have any questions from the public? All right, do we have any questions from the BAR? Okay. Do we have any comments from the public? All right, any comments from the BAR?
I think my one concern is just that there's no front door facing the street, but then again, there wasn't to begin with, so, yeah, they're not making the condition any less compliant in that sense. I'm good with it.
Yeah, there is sort of the entrance is sort of off to the side at the one end. I was sort of the same mindset, Carl. I feel like I can't, it's tough to put my finger on it, but something on that front elevation, maybe even a horizontal belt course or I just don't know. It feels like it's missing something. It's tough to put my finger on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also the difference between one of our design control districts and the historic conservation district, where it's more about the massing and the scale, so that's where I'm.
On the other hand, the building, the house is so far back from the street
Right.
that the front door wouldn't be that significant a presence in any case.
Yeah. No, what even actually a front door, just
But I-
something. But I think your point's taken, Carl. Also, this is the parameters of this district aren't as strict.
I'm fine with it.
I'm fine with it.
Okay. Motion? Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
All right, thank you.
Having considered the standards set forth within the city code, including the historic HC district design guidelines, is that right? Historic Conservation District design guidelines, I move to find that the alterations to 809 Locust Avenue satisfy the BAR's criteria and are compatible with this property and other properties in the Martha Jefferson Historic Conservation District, and that the BAR approves the application as submitted.
Second?
All right, thank you. I'll call the vote. Mr. Timmerman,
Yes.
Ms. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz,
Yes.
Mr. Bailey,
Yes.
Mr. Gastinger,
Aye.
Mr. Rosenthal,
Yes.
and chair votes aye. Motion passes.
Very good. All
Thank
right,
you.
Julie, you're all set.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Appreciate you all. Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right, our next item is 7 Gildersleeve Wood.
Is not online. And he's not here. So, we can take action in his absence. That's fine. I talked to him enough, I think I could explain what he shared with me, or this can be deferred to September.
Well, could we just move to do you think he's not coming later, or we could always come back to him?
Okay. Yeah, it's a good one. He will not be here.
Oh,
He's probably flying a jumbo jet somewhere across the Atlantic. I don't think he's available. And his wife's not available.
Does the applicant need to be here?
That isn't, if there were questions, or if you all were going to deny, I would suggest deferral. If this is, if there's support for this, I have no issue with you all approving it.
Would y'all like to discuss it?
Let's give it a try.
Let's give it a try,
I
yeah.
think so. All
Is
right.
it simply redoing that front entry?
Yes.
Correct. And so this is, sorry,
Let's do, if we're
Blanking
going to
out,
do it, let's
getting
still
out of
stick to our
rhythm here.
process.
right.
So Jeff, do you want to give a very brief intro?
Right, so this is the property 7 Gildersleeve Wood. It is within the Oakhurst Gildersleeve ADC district. This is, the house was built in 1955. It's actually the most recent house of the, I think it's 60 properties in the ADC district. Most of them date into to that 1920s, 1930s period of UVA expansion. So this is a later, or I guess a later house within the district. The entrance feature that you see in the photograph is what's there. They would like to build a portico, to have somewhat of a sheltered opening, so that, and I don't have it in this image, but it would be kind of a typical porch coming out from the wall. So it would be removing the pilasters and the arch pediment that you see over the red door. Their staff supportive of it because there are, looked at a lot of colonial revival houses around town. You see both types, some with the entrance feature with the arch, pediment over it, and some with the, extended portico. So it's not, what is being proposed is perfectly appropriate for the house. The question would be, is removing the existing trim of such a significant change that it alters the historic character of the property. So I looked at that through the lens of the demolition criteria in the guidelines. And one, the house is, yes, this is on the National Register as part of this district. I don't believe it's eligible for individual listing. It's not the work of a master architect or a master craftsman. No historic events associated with it. So in terms of significance of, this is a house where something famous happened and somebody famous designed it, that doesn't exist. Adding this portico would alter the front, but it would not be irreversible. And it's not the only example left of this. There's not, this, as if this is something unusual. That's not the case here. So in that regard, and in a conversation we had earlier, it's possible these were architectural drawings left from the applicant brought them in. They are very old. It's very possible these were designed with the house and just never realized when it was constructed. So I don't have a problem with the with the alterations. We have really good photographs of what's there, such that it could be replicated, and we'll have that in the BAR archives.
And how far out will it come?
The existing, that stoop will remain, so it'll simply enclose the brick stoop that's there.
All right, any other questions for staff? All right, do we have any questions from the public?
Which, you're for this one. Are you, is that you?
That looks familiar. That would be
Oh,
us.
you are here. I thought you were
Good timing.
in an
We're
airplane
we're
somewhere.
running a little ahead of
Yeah,
schedule.
we were at 6 o'clock appointment. Is that correct?
Well, if we get ahead of schedule, we stay ahead of schedule,
All right.
so,
Yeah, that's-
We were bowling.
that's Fabulous timing.
yeah, good timing.
18 years ago, and I believe it was way behind, so
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is wonderful.
that's great.
So I have additional images. This is just to introduce it, so.
So we
So
got,
there's-
Yeah, and I brought blueprints, if anybody wants to see those.
So.
So I do have questions now that you're here.
Oh, yeah, please fire away.
so yeah, we don't have any questions from the public, I don't think, Remy, right? All right, so now, yes, questions from the board. So go ahead.
I was just curious where the drawing came from and, what its relationship is with your house.
So the previous owners, we've been in the house
November will be 25 years. And the previous owners had a local architect, Russell Skinner, draw these up, and then they never went ahead with the building. And as part of the sale, they said, we've got these architectural drawings if you want them. And now, decades later, we're putting them to use. Yeah, so that is where they came from.
Tired of what packages?
Saves on design fees.
It does, it does. And, yeah, we liked, the architect gave 3 different renderings. The previous owners agreed on the one that they advanced to blueprints, and that's actually the same style we liked as well. So it would be very similar to what is shown there. The changes being, we replaced the stairs many years ago. So the stairs that are depicted in the pictures will be kept in place. And instead of having a bull nose, they're just regular square brick stairs. The dimensions are just a slight bit wider. And then the other change, we're planning on doing this without railings. And we're under the impression that to codes, it does not require railings, and we've never had railings in 25 years, so we haven't fallen off the landing yet, so that would really be about the only change. Other than that, standing seam roof, which will match our existing house. Current storm door is just about to fall off the hinges. We're going to replace that with a exact replica, but in mahogany. I believe that's known as a Richmond storm door, as I understand it. And there's a fabric wood shop in Richmond that makes them. But other than that, it will be pretty much exactly as depicted there. Questions, comments on any of that?
Yes, did
When,
y'all-
just
y'all-
as a little bit of a background, when the neighborhood first went to historic district standards, in the review of each individual house, it kind of stated that ours was not contributing to the historic nature, and it was built in 1955 and is somewhat newer than most of the rest. And over the years, we've tried to add some details to make it look a little more historical. We put the standing seam metal roof on it. We built a stone wall out front that ties into the stone walls and the rest of the neighborhood. So we've done a few things to try to integrate it more into the historical nature of the neighborhood, and we plan on staying in that house till they haul us out in a box. So 25 in, and we may be there for another 25, so we're going to use very good materials and build it to very high standards. So
Alrighty. Did y'all look at all at like incorporating this existing door surround and still putting a roof over it?
we did. The existing pilasters are rotting in places, and we do want it to be just slightly wider.
Right.
So
Okay.
we considered that, but we kind of felt like trying to pull those off and move them out might just have them disintegrate,
Gotcha.
and they're in pretty rough shape as they stand. One of the reasons we're doing this whole project is, everything's been out in the elements for 70 years now, and the stoop is going, the storm door is going, the pilasters are slowly going. So
Yeah, there are no close-ups, but the
it's
the
that.
pilasters actually are disintegrated at the bottom. You
Gotcha.
can see. They're pretty much.
Yeah, there's some patchwork there. So
Um,
yes, we did consider that, but,
Okay.
and the one change that is depicted in the blueprints is we are opting for smooth columns as opposed to fluted. And across the back of the house and one side, it has all smooth columns. So we're trying to tie that all together.
And then one other question. it might be a slightly leading question, but you said you're going to match the roof, your roof with the standing seam metal roof.
Correct.
Does that mean you'll be employing like a mechanically fastened, hand crimped ridge detail? Or
That's what we have on the existing roof, yes.
Great.
I don't think we'll have snow catchers on it,
That's okay.
but,
What I
yeah,
want to
that-
avoid here is a like snap-on ridge cap.
no,
No,
no.
absolutely
Thank you. Perfect.
What about the light? Are you gonna replace that with something?
Yeah, currently you have the side light, and I believe in one of the architectural drawings, it has a hanging light hanging from under the apex of the ridge line. So with moving the columns out slightly, that will cover the holes where the side light currently is placed.
We'll have a pendant, obviously.
Yeah,
underneath.
some hanging pendant variety, but in keeping with the colonial theme.
What are the rules on railings and going up the stairs? Something to,
For code?
yeah,
So for a guardrail, the walking surface has to be 30 inches off the adjacent ground. So I don't think they need a guardrail. It's up to the permit office if they need a handrail. There isn't one existing, so it's stayed that way. I think if they built it new, they probably would have to put a handrail in. That's,
But also not for us to.
Yeah, so that's a little, since they're proposing not to put one, we're not gonna rule on what it should look like or anything like that. As
We've
Carl
done
said, I
enough.
think it's up to the building official to decide whether he's gonna require a handrail or not.
Okay.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah, this came up with Don Dougal's house on University Circle. His insurance company actually made him
That's
install
another,
railings.
Yeah.
So I worked with him on a real simple, basic railing, so it would be relatively simple if they wanted to add one to work with him on it.
Yeah, Jeff sent us a sample, and it's similar to the railings you see at UVA. And if it were required by insurance or code, we'd be happy to do
Sure.
that. But yeah, it would be very
think
simple,
that-
basic, unobtrusive.
yeah. I mean, pending how this turns out, if that is a requirement, that could probably be approved administratively by staff. Any more questions from the BAR? All right, we'll go to comments from the public.
Nobody online.
Okay, and comments from the BAR.
I can make a motion. All right.
Go ahead.
Having considered the standards set forth in the city code, including ADC district design guidelines, I move to find the proposed portico at 7 Gildersleeve Wood satisfies the BAR's criteria and is compatible with this property and other properties in this ADC district, and that the BAR approves the request.
A second?
Go ahead.
That's fine. All right, I'll call the vote. Mr. Timmerman,
Aye.
Ms. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz,
Yes.
Mr. Bailey,
Yes.
Mr. Gastinger,
Aye.
Mr. Rosenthal,
aye.
and the chair votes aye.
You're good? You can take the sign off your front yard, too.
Thank you very much.
Motion
Board members,
passes.
thank you very much. Jeff, thanks for
welcome.
all your assistance. It's
Welcome.
been
I
a
was
pleasure working with you guys.
meeting you tonight, and then you swooped in out, as if out of a Boeing.
You didn't know, he's violent.
So, yeah,
A lot of
it's
aviation.
just got here. Lastly, I guess we still owe you for the permitting fee. When do you guys send us a bill on that? How do we do? Do I swing by your office?
It's in order to finalize everything.
Did we
you
undo
can
our
send-
motion?
You can drop something off, you can pay it online.
Okay.
I don't know, have you had success navigating the portal?
I have.
Yeah, I think we can make that work.
I have a question. So I understand that you have made a nice PDF of our prints, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Which, that would be very nice, if I could get a copy of those, because as you know, they're quite old, that was good PDF.
Yeah.
That'd be very kind.
We'll take care of it. Yeah,
Perfect.
so you just go on the portal, pay the fee.
Good to go. All right, outstanding. That was super easy, super quick. Thank you for your professionalism. Yeah, we got a dinner reservation?
Tell your friends.
Awesome. Make-
Thanks.
Right on. Go celebrate.
Thank you so much.
All righty, thank y'all. All right. You good? We still got one more. Next, item is 316 East Main Street. I think the applicant is here. Good evening.
Let me bring this thing up and talk, give you my 2 cents. Come on, machine. I'm not that guy. There we go. Why am I still looking at this? All right, there we go. All right, so this, it's 316 East Main Street. This is the south elevation, the Water Street elevation of the hardware store that's on the mall. The back, the south entrance has become, somewhat of a retail entrance. I'm not sure when the door, the commercial door, entrance door you see there was added, but on the right photo from the 1970s, there had been a sort of basic roll-up door there. We're unable to find any images that are historic or show a historic door opening, so we can't say what was there. We can assume. I think I mentioned earlier, the opening's a lot larger than the picture sort of reflects. It is a good size. It looks there almost like it's just a double door, but it's tall and wide. The request came from Mr. Hockensmith about there's the potential for, there have been some inquiries about the use of the space, and potential tenants have asked, or I can let him explain that, but if the opening could be made more utilitarian, possibly allowing vehicles in there. So where I came down on it was, one, we could go back to a simple roll-up door like you see. We have approved those in other openings. Two, we could go with a fenestrated garage door, something like was done up at Otto's up the street, a roll-up door that has glass in it, fully glazed or partially glazed, if that was important. And then the third option would be not a recreation of something from an old photograph, but a more an architecturally styled door that might seem more appropriate than a basic garage roll-up door. We talked briefly in the pre-meeting about some zoning questions. The conclusion that I had in my conversation with the zoning administrator is that this alteration does not, this building is non-conforming, and the alteration would not require, because it's a historic structure, would not require that they bring it into conformity. And that is that this is with the new code, there's a certain amount of transparency that's required. So to make this conforming, it almost require more windows be added to it. So the one question would be is if you wanted to include some glazing in the garage door, then you're at least not less non-conforming or more non-conforming, or just something utilitarian, given how it's going to be used. It's reversible. What you see in the center there is not the historic door. And when I talked to Mr. Hockensmith, I think he's looking for utilitarian use of this space and to maybe answer some questions from potential tenants. I don't know how I would look at this. If he had photographs of a historic door and we knew what was there, I think I'd be looking at this somewhat differently, but we don't know what was there. And so I think to try to replicate something or to even simulate something is false. I think that Mr. Hocksmith can probably answer better on what's intended for the use of the space. I think if somebody needs warehousing and they're looking, in order to extend the life of this building, can have a door that you can't see in, I would understand that. But I think if it's just looking for some flexibility, maybe somebody wants to use it for a dining space and open and close the door, then I would suggest that you have some sort of glazed opening. So that's my feel for this one. The guidelines don't give us a clear direction. You all can certainly disagree with me on that. And then where, there's a photograph that they shared with me, Mr. Hogsmith shared earlier today, kind of just that idea of basically a commercial roll-up door. Pardon my very rough Photoshop there, but that's, and obviously colors could change, but that's the general intent. And sir, if you have any,
I have a question for staff.
yes.
You said that the applications should go back to a roll-up door.
I keep using roll-up door maybe more generically than,
Do we know that a roll-up door was ever there? I
We
thought you
know
said
that-
we don't know what was there.
well, the 70s door, this right here is,
That, the one in the
yeah,
photo.
it's just
Okay.
It
like,
looked like a roll-up, yeah.
Okay.
and there's
And-
two kinds, there's the roll-up doors that literally, curl up at the top, and then there's a garage door that would
Right.
kind of,
And then, there's typewritten, it's unidentified, but there's typewritten, there's a report in here that's historic, that's typewritten. I can't, they're
Oh, the
handwritten
survey.
pages on yellow
Mhm.
legal pad, and then they're typewritten. And there's no attribution what those are, but it's obviously in the file.
it's a lot of
Right.
pages, yeah.
And halfway down there, it does say it was a warehouse door. It doesn't say it was a vehicular door, right?
So it's hard to say, I mean,
I mean, obviously, it was used to move,
right, right.
something large or volume of something in there, but it didn't necessarily say it was a garage door.
Correct.
And somebody has bracketed that language on that page. And I'm in page 136 of our packet, if anybody's interested. It's about halfway down the large paragraph in the middle. But it does not, with the history of this, we don't necessarily think it was vehicular from the beginning of the time that this building was constructed, right?
Right. Interestingly, the window in the center has a large stone sill on it, and evidence almost of that being
Moving things
what
through.
things were going
Yep.
up against. But this opening hasn't been altered from what I could tell. It's hard to say. I think, maybe a vehicular opening, a vehicle of some kind. My best guess, given photos of old doors we've seen around town, it was probably a paneled wood door. The diagonal material seems to have been popular around town. Was it hinged? Possibly, but we just don't know. And
Thank you.
Alrighty. Would the applicant, would you like to add any more or make a presentation of any sort?
Just a couple of comments, should I stand here?
Yes, please, that'd be great. And
One
just,
thing is that picture on the right with the green arrow pointing to it, that's what the door looked like before Octagon remodeled it in 2008.
Oh, that was 1970.
That's what it looked like.
Yeah.
And they put the doors in, the double glazed doors for Urban Outfitters who deploy their leased the space from the beginning to their specs. I've had half a building vacant for 14 months in this economy we're in, and I've struggled with a lot of people who would ask the question, how do we get stuff delivered to the property? And of course, I'd have to say, well, like everybody else, you double park in the street or whatever you do and haul it up with a cart. So I finally got a couple people interested where if I could provide some sort of way to get goods and services, or goods, merchandise into the building without double parking, that they might be interested. So I thought, well, let me see if I can get the BAR to think about going back to what it was like before 2007 or 8. And so I looked at garage doors, and I like a roll-up idea, one like in a residential use where they go up on a track would not work, but a roll-up door would work. And could you show me that picture again,
Yeah.
Jeff, with the suggested, that one? That's a door I had looked at and a proposal made to me to put that door in, although that's white, it comes in gray, and I wanted something dark, so that's unobtrusive and not stand out as you drive by or walk by. So it would be very dark, plain, no glazing, because that won't work in a roll-up door, and it would be close to what was there 10 years ago. So that's what I'd like to do. And then I'd have to, of course, make room inside, but that's another project, and you don't deal with that, but I have to make room to get a truck in off the street, that far in there, because right now, there's a floor in the way, we have to take that out. And there is still a curb cut there, you can see in the picture on the left, so the curb cut is reserved. You will lose, the city will lose one parking space, and then there's a half a space, you see right there between those two cars, that's not used, and that could be divided up in the other 3 spaces, so you'll only lose one car, one parking spot. So that's what I like.
All right, thank you, sir. Do we have any questions from the public? Nope. All right. Okay. Questions from the BAR?
I have a question. I'm assuming that you would need to remove the transom as well, so that it looks pretty much like what we see in the 75?
The roll-up canister, whatever it's called, would go on the other side of those windows at the top.
So you'd keep
They
the,
could stay.
you could keep those, okay.
But
And,
the picture we're showing that Jeff
Gotcha.
conjured up with his Photoshop. Took out that part.
Yeah.
okay.
And I could go with either one.
And the intention is to match the color of the storefront windows that you have on the rest of the property?
You almost can't. I mean, it comes in a choice of 3 colors, and one of them is not dark like the window around where my first lease sign is. Now, that was changed when Octagon did the building. They made it that dark, and it was approved back then. I just want to do it dark, but if I could get that color, I'd be glad to get it, but they don't make it that way. I have it painted.
So what color are you proposing?
Pardon?
What color are you proposing?
Gray. It's a dark gray or medium gray. It'd be closer to the glazing on the existing doors. It'd be closer to that color, but maybe a little darker.
All right, I have a question. How tall are the operable leaves on the existing doors?
9 feet.
9 feet.
How wide is the,
8.9.
so I'm assuming by taking those,
It would just fit, and that door would just fit in there, with no room to spare. And a truck would have a challenge to back in there, but creating enough space inside, they can do it.
So they would do a 90-degree turn from the middle of Water Street and back in?
Yeah, or pull in front ways, they can do it either way. Then they'd have to back out on the street to get
Yeah.
out.
That would be easier.
And as several other properties do on the downtown mall, there's a couple that are like that.
Yeah.
They have little places they sneak in and it preserved it over the years, and they're
Mhm.
still able to use it. We have see, Urban Outfitters had that used, that double door was used for their employees only. They didn't have the retail customer come and go in and out of that. It was just for the
Yeah,
employees.
no, they use that as a retail space. I'm
They did,
positive.
they did.
Kate's remembers too.
But you couldn't come in and out as a customer.
Yes, you could. I went in there.
Not after I took over the building.
I don't know when you took over the building,
Nine years
Mr.
ago.
Hawkinsmith, but I'm remembering, as a patron, you used to be able to walk in here.
Yeah.
And you could clearly see
Well,
merchandise.
they probably lost
Yeah,
too
it wasn't
much.
at the beginning of having Urban Outfitters there, but it was later. I don't know whether they migrated some of the use downstairs or something, but
Probably lost too much merchandise.
Yeah.
Because they did have the anti-theft thing that you walk through, was still installed when my people bought the building. And when I took over managing it, it was locked. That door you could not go in and out of except as an employee. And they had a camera on it to record every employee coming and going and the time of the day and all that. It must have been a real challenge for them. Anyway, I just want to do a plain old garage door, roll-up door.
So I guess I've got a follow-up question on the color. Would you be open to looking or, doing more research on other vendors that might offer a color?
I would, but I'd also
That's darker?
find out about trying to paint it. I could
Fair
just
enough.
paint it.
Okay.
I assumed that I could get a painter to spray paint it with
Sure.
an enamel or something that would stand up to the weather.
Gotcha. Okay.
I'm glad to do that.
Any other questions from the BAR? Okay. Any comments from the public that's not online? All right. Open it to comments from the BAR.
From my perspective, a loading door on Water Street is wholly appropriate, and I think that I'm inclined to support the proposal. I do think it would be preferable that the door match the color of the window trim on the rest of the building as closely as possible. That's my personal thought.
I feel like it's a bit unfortunate. It feels like it goes the wrong way from how Water Street's been developing as kind of an active pedestrian zone. But at the same time, I mean, it sounds like a use that's important for where you are currently. So with that, I wouldn't get in the way. One thing I would add to Breck's comment, however, is the placement of the where the door comes up. It shouldn't be visible through the transom, right? I mean, I think I don't know how that's going to work, but I think you don't want to be able to see the back of the.
I wouldn't either. I could put just a blank partition or something on the back of that. I have to have a carpenter redo the whole interior to mount the door onto. Not affecting the brick. Nothing will be seen, but it will have to be prepared for the door people to install the garage door. And that rolled up cabinet, if you will go on the inside back, maybe that far from the glazing. So will you be able to see it? I would be able to I would be willing to put something on the glass like on the existing doors now. Just do that up on the top so you couldn't see that.
So let me clarify.
Does that suit you?
Let me clarify. Was your original intent to retain the transom light, or would
If
you?
I could, yeah.
You'd like to.
I asked the garage guy, door installer, could we save the light?
Okay.
And he said, well, yes, but if, and,
Right.
but he said, yeah, you could. But he didn't say anything about hiding it from seeing it outside. But I'm willing to glaze it, or whatever that word is.
You could put some
on that
film
glazing
or
there that
right.
mask it.
I mean, think the fact that it's so relative to this image, then that transom would be, I didn't know if the height would allow it. I mean.
Yeah, I guess I was curious. The photo from the previous condition from the 1970s seemed to appear to me that the door actually sat kind of behind the wall itself, so that you sealed it
right
at the back edge of the wall, which I think would be appropriate. I personally, I don't necessarily feel like you have to retain the transom. There was a question earlier that suggested you might, but I don't think that's something that I would require personally. Since I've got the mic, I tend to agree with Breck that a darker color would be more suitable to match the other windows. I think I see this as a service entrance. I think historically it was a service entrance. I think you've got a personnel entrance just adjacent to it. So it seems to me that there's sort of the scale and the fenestration dictates what's supposed to go through this portal, right? A person or stuff. And so I do agree that it's appropriate. Jeff did some research, found what may have been an example of historic service entrance doors. Those are no longer here. I think a modern roll-up garage door is the modern equivalent of those service doors, right? So it makes sense that we're sort of applying our modern standard into this historic building. Nobody's going to be confused and think that roll-up door is historic.
No.
So for me, I think it's a question of do we want to require, if we're going to move forward with this, would we require the transom stay or not? That's just a question put out there for folks. But I also want to ask if there's other folks that have comments. I know y'all have been looking on your computers, so I want to open y'all a chance to please comment.
Sherry, did you have, I've got thoughts for sure, but.
I'll go. I actually do agree with Mr. Timmerman, and I almost said verbatim what you just said during our pre-meeting. And I would say that this, installing or reinstalling a garage door is compatible with the district. But as far as Water Street is concerned, it's a place that has increasingly been pedestrian-friendly, less vehicular-friendly. I noted that the city's garage has no entrances for vehicles on Water Street, which is pretty amazing for a very large-scale building. And both of those entrances were relegated to the side streets of 2nd and 4th to make that, it could have been easy to have wide turn lanes off of Water, but I think it was an effort to make Water less pedestrian, less, of a pass-through, and more pedestrian friendly and less vehicular. And there have been lots of developments, I think, along Water Street that have tried to make it less of a drive-through experience with, the back garages and back loading docks on Water. It's been kind of delightful to see Waterbird, for instance, make their space into what used to be a parking lot and to what looked like it was facing Water, and more businesses. And some even small retail, including, my memory is, I remember exactly what this looked like. There was a ramp up the right-hand side. There was apparel on the left, and you could see a desk in front. But, the little peaks that we've had of a pedestrian experience on Water, this seems to be taking a step back. I don't think it destroys the district, but I just want to note that there has been some effort to make this not the back door of the downtown mall. And I think Water was going in that direction, and I find it regrettable that we would be basically rendering a space that used to be used by humans, even if it was just for a secured entrance for employees, into a purposeful vehicular-only entrance. I mean, once you put a garage door up there, no human's going to walk through it again. And I understand there are other apertures. There's another door there, but that's my only concern about this, is just taking kind of a step in another direction where I'd love to see Water encourage more of that frontage.
Are you planning to take trash out this way?
No, the trash comes down the hallway from a trash storage room on the same level as that, down and through that single pass-through door to the left there of my sign. There's a single, it's not quite in the film, not quite in the picture. But there's a, yeah, to the left between the no parking cabinets there on the wall and my for lease sign in the window. There's a door right there with 317 above it. That's the entrance for people now. And it goes into a hallway, goes back to an elevator, and beyond that is a trash room. And they bring the trash out right through that door and put it out for the pickup. So that would not change, it would be the same.
Well, all right, I'm going to agree with Sherry and David on this, that it's the character of Water Street has changed. And it's very evident on this block. I mean, the building just to the right of it, it's clear that those three entrances have all been changed from vehicular entrances and warehouse entrances to being something that's more pedestrian-friendly, pedestrian-oriented. So I do struggle with the idea of going backwards. Even though there was a garage door there originally, it is taking the character of the street backwards from where it has gone and where we want it to go. Since the rewriting of the zoning code, we are now tasked with also looking at our comprehensive plan and looking at evaluating our these applications. And the comprehensive plan is very focused on reducing vehicular use, increasing pedestrian use, making spaces more pedestrian friendly. So under, I don't have the chapters in here, I copied and pasted a bunch of stuff, but our community vision statement for land use, urban form, and historic and cultural preservation. There's a line that says the city will prioritize transit-oriented development, smart growth, infill, and adaptive reuse policies to address housing needs, climate change goals, reduce vehicular travel, and support walkability and bikeability. Putting a reinstating that curb cut and allowing vehicles to pass over the sidewalk is counter to that. Further down, objectives for mixed-use areas. Promote and encourage design elements that enhance community livability, such as active uses at the ground floor level along key street frontages. So this doorway used to be an active use. It used to be a retail storefront, and now it is proposed to just be a warehouse use, a storage use, a vehicular use. Encourage compact block and street network. Encourage compact block and street networks and a built environment that facilitates walking, biking, and bus riding. And again, this is going backwards from that. I still think, I know we're supposed to kind of ignore the zoning code on this, but I still think there's a zoning issue at the end of the day. Even ignoring that, and with kind of a lack of guidelines to fall back on, I'm going to fall back on our comp plan, and I can't approve this.
The curb cut's still there, by the way.
I know the curb cut's there, but you'd
Still there.
be using it again. It's as opposed to currently there's a parking space in front of there, but now you'd be allowing vehicles to pass back and forth over it.
I think that it would be inappropriate for this board to take the zoning rules into account. That would be taken up by someone else, and to approve or disapprove something outside of our guidelines, I think would be wrong. I just want to get on the record saying that.
Just clarify that you're taking it.
Yeah, that was, my comments were from the comp plan, not the zoning.
I know, but I still think that that is not what we are looking at.
In our consideration, we're permitted to look at the comprehensive plan and its description of districts and streets and, for lack of a better word, sub areas.
And just so I'm clear, it's the matter of the glazing being one piece, but the introduction of vehicular traffic, this would facilitate traffic. Just make sure I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, the city bought the building next door to ours, and it's all glass front and back, with a glass elevator on the front. It's not historic at all in the looks. So I'm thinking that we're trying to preserve the look on the Water Street side, not make it any more modern.
Agree.
And it's utilitarian for our use.
So the options available, you all, if you're, certainly have a straw poll, see where you stand. Mr. Hawkinsmith can defer this and we can have a further discussion. If there's approval, you approve it. If there's denial, there is the ability to go to council. And so I think that there's some, in that, there's assumptions about how this space may be used, but we're not, just to be clear, the BAR is not saying there's a use we prefer or don't prefer. How that space would be used is not what the matter is, whether, you know, it could be somebody going in and out with a golf cart. But if you were to deny it, and my suggestion would be Mr. Hawksmith defer it, but if you were to deny it, I think be very careful, and I don't mean that in a threatening way. I mean, be very careful in expressing what it was and why, and certainly you've said some things tonight that we can be in the record.
I think we probably should go ahead and have an actual vote on it, right? And I would be happy to make a motion for approval, given this discussion, and see if what people think about it, and then we'll see if that will be of use to you. So, do I have permission?
Sure, yeah.
All right. Having considered the standards set forth in the city code, including the ADC district guidelines, design guidelines, I move to approve a COA for the installation of a garage door, a roll-up garage door, as described by Mr. Hawkinsmith at the Water Street elevation of 316 East Main under the following conditions which shall satisfy the VAR's criteria. And the condition is that the garage door match basically the color of the windows in the back of that building at this time.
Which for the notes is a dark bronze.
A dark bronze.
Second.
Alrighty. Mr. Timmerman?
Yes.
Ms. Lewis?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
No.
Mr. Rosenthal?
Aye.
Mr. Gastinger?
Aye.
Mr. Bailey?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. So the motion carries
Thank you.
6-1.
Okay.
Thank
Good
you,
to go.
sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Joshi, you're on.
Does anybody, before we get, so that ends all of our applications, or COA applications. Would anybody like a 5-minute break?
I think that's probably helpful for them to get the AV started.
We're going to take a 5-minute break, folks. Thank you very much.
Talkative.
That's right.
takes a while,
All righty. I'll call us back to order. We are very pleased and fortunate to have Paul Josie from Wolf Josie Landscape Architects here with us this evening. And he's going to give us a presentation on the Downtown Mall tree study, which I've been told is excellent, so I'm looking forward to it. So Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you all very much for having me. We'll just go over the project schedule and scope, a little historical context, then we'll look at a tree inventory and assessment that we did, and then we'll start working into the framework plan and the recommendations and phasing. So our work, we've worked at a lot of universities and institutions, as well as urban spaces in Washington, D.C., as well as in North Carolina and locally, working on trees and soils, but also in urban development. And so our team was made up of ourselves with Peter Russell as the project manager, Keith Pitchford, who's an arborist who's worked all over the country, based long-time practice in D.C., and then we also worked with Line and Grade and Downey and Scott for cost estimating. And the city team with Rian, Stephen, and Rob Mathis with the Parks and Rec. And then we had a series of committees, a city steering committee that was made up of these groups on the left, community advisory that expanded that a bit more to other groups. So we had representatives from each of these organizations or boards involved. And then from a schedule standpoint, you can see we started this last fall doing an assessment of all the trees, and then we had through the winter looking at really inventory, like looking at that inventory and assessment, and then meeting with these various groups throughout the process. And we are sort of at the end of this process and sort of packaging this all up. You can see here the historical sort of extents of the mall and how this was really created not only in 1976, but a second phase in 1980, 1985 with the Omni, and then these sort of the rebricking effort and the side streets. So it's really been put together in piecemeal over time. And then just to give you a bit more context, you may know this, I'm going to go through this somewhat quickly, but just with the urban renewal program, sort of the demolition of African-American neighborhoods such as Vinegar Hill, and this sort of redevelopment concept for downtown, it sat dormant for a number of years after it was bulldozed, which led to the early 70s, the hiring of Larry Halpern's firm to put together a pedestrian mall with the pedestrian mall. This wasn't a brand new thing. This was in vogue. This was like the most popular strategy after urban development to put a pedestrian mall. There were 132 created, and only 43 remain of those. And just of note, Charlottesville is the longest operating and in the country. It's 8 blocks long. It has been very successful. And the firm that was hired to do this was Lawrence Halpern and Associates, and they have done exceptional work throughout the country, notably in the Northwest, but also in Washington, D.C. and other places. And they were a pioneer in participatory design processes, especially during sort of the social unrest happening in the 70s and 60s, really working with an environmentally and ecologically sensitive way, but also with communities. So you can see he had these large workshops of different groups, bringing them together to sort of come up with what the downtown mall should look like. And again, this is on the National Register. It is it's the only existing work of Halpern's in Virginia currently. And so it is a very historic place, the downtown mall. Not just a great place for us, but really nationally recognized. There's a few key elements of it: the choreography of the space, how the bosques are laid out to create movement around and among the bosques, and not a static direction on the mall. The bosques themselves, the paving patterns, the water, and then the small scale elements of those. And so you can see here how the choreography of those bosques, how they shift back and forth. So it's not a one-way or a two-way street. People have to force into different directions, facing each other, really having to interact throughout, almost like dancing, or how that is choreographed in this scheme. You also see the bosques are different sizes, throughout as well, creating different environments at each block. You can see too, the types of trees really was primarily all willow oaks. There were some red maples right at city center that was really meant as an accent. These are the fall colors of those trees. And again, those paving accents, you see the runnels, which was the former curbs of the original Main Street. And you can see these larger brick sizes really meant to distinguish themselves from the architectural brick, but really the floor of the downtown mall, as well as some accent panels throughout. There were key water fountains that were created throughout as well, sort of acting as sort of a sound and visual device throughout to create movement and activity along the mall. And there was a number of these small-scale elements that were created, from chairs to planters and poles and such, that some are still there today. So when we started to look at the trees themselves, we looked at 109 trees, not including, there was 15 trees that were removed from the original design, but we looked above ground, at grade, and below ground, really thinking about what the trees look like in the canopy, at the surface, and then again in the soils. So when looking at the canopies, first we looked at the species and noticed that, they're primarily 65% willow oaks. Those are really the dominant tree. And unfortunately, willow oaks have not had a lot of pest issues or concerns, which has worked out in their favor. And then when we started to look at the health of the trees, that was another story. And generally, 60% of the trees are in good to excellent shape, but 20 of the willow oaks, about over 25% of those are in fair condition, a number poor, and some removed. And you can sort of see that of the larger trees, it's a similar ratio, but there's a number of fair and poor trees, and a number that have been removed from the original plantings. So this is what that looks like in practice. You can see some areas, such as this 7-tree bosque here, that really has the poorest health. There were very few 7-tree bosques. That tight spacing really they competed for one another with resources and really stressed the entire grove out. Others, such as at Central Place right here, these were all red maples. Those were replaced in 2009 with a different type of Norway maple. All of those have failed. Maples aren't urban street trees. They don't do well in really difficult environments, unlike the willow oaks that are really tolerant in compacted situations. You can start to see that 12% of the trees have been removed. And you can see after this assessment, there's an additional proposed removals of trees that are in very poor shape that are potential hazards. Some have already been removed as well. So we're looking at roughly approaching 15 to 20% of trees that'll be removed. And then you start to see there's actually some groves that are in better shape than others, just kind of at a larger scale. We also noticed some trees with these large heater wounds. We've talked about these before to other groups, and you'll just see that some of them already have been removed. There's 15% of the trees were impacted by cafe heaters. These came about during the pandemic, and sort of a number of them have come down and are in stress conditions. We started to look at the plane of the paving and how they interact with the trees. Again, you can see this form. Originally, the design had these tight openings, and you can sort of see here in this left, this is the original framework. It's a hidden grate with a paving that goes over top of it. So the language is really the plane of bricks with the trees coming directly out of those. So you have this really clean, simple, visual language of the trees coming directly from the paving. In 2009, they added these grates around them, and then they modified those. And you can see where the grates have been expanded. They removed the original ones and expanded those. And since then, those trees have continued to grow, and they've expanded into these. So these are starting to girdle those trees with those grates. So this is current conditions, and this is happening. And there's also some differences of the paving depths where that impacts how high the flare is, where the trunk transitions to the roots. That increases that girdling effect. So, almost half of the trees have damage from the current grates underneath the ground in those trees. When we started to look at the soils, we looked at underground, we looked at utilities, those sort of primarily a sanitary, storm sewer, and then water and gas lines. You can notice the storm sewer is located where the old gutters once were of Main Street weren't changed. But the gas and water was changed during the design of the redesign. We also looked at the soils. We did 15 samples, one from each grove. We looked at soil pH, nutrients, organic matter, the ability of the soil to hold nutrients, the moisture of the soil, the compaction, the texture of those soils. And so you started to see here, most of the soils are a sandy clay loam. This is pretty typical of our area. They're pretty healthy soils, good structured soil, meaning they have kind of clumps of soil that kind of create air pockets, those kind of clumps or peds, and a few clay loams. And then there's a few clay soils noticed right here in this orange area, and then some really compacted subgrade soils in this area. But these had very poor structure. They were screened before they were installed with the code building, so not very much structure to those soils. That was very heavily compacted in that area as well. Also at the Omni was very heavily compacted. I mean, sorry, not at the Omni, at the code building planter, as well as all the way at the other end at the pavilion. A lot of people there, not uncommon to have the surface so compacted in that condition. We started to look at moisture levels of the soils. Again, this area really stuck out as a problem. It was anaerobic, highly saturated soils. Because of that loss of structure, no water is really moving through that soil. There's no drains in that soil. Also, this area where all the trees are currently dead and removed, that it was excessively saturated. Maybe just because the trees aren't there, but it could be a drainage issue as well. Organic matter levels were surprisingly quite good throughout, no real concerns. pH, some areas were slightly higher, which would, while willow oaks can take this, if you're changing species, you want to make sure you have trees that can tolerate a little higher pH levels. And looking at the ability of the soil to hold nutrients, this is the cation exchange capacity, a more complicated term, but in general, I think at the pavilion is where we saw that sort of lowest ability to hold nutrients. That was one of those areas that raised some eyebrows for those trees. So just kind of a quick diagram: compaction, drainage in some areas, low nutrient availability and soil compaction. These are kind of the takeaways from the process. We also looked at utilities. So water and gas, you can see how these lines shift at the groves. This was designed in the 70s to reflect that sort of changing growth. So these are somewhat new. But when you start to look at the laterals, that's where you see those actually cross through the tree groves. It can cause potential conflicts. And these are the sanitary, down the center, the storm sewers. And when we start to look at this sort of mess of utilities all together, there's a lot happening. Fortunately, from a utility standpoint, there's not much. There's really no concerns from the utilities currently. There's no root conflicts. These are fibrous root systems. Despite having all this overlap, they're quite deep. Some of them, So you have your sanitary that's quite deep in the profile. Really, the surface roots are, not an issue. So, but it is the laterals that become a little bit more of an issue, which we'll get to in a bit. So you can sort of see what that overlook looked. The red zones are those critical root zones. If you start to cut into those, you start to impact the structure of those trees. So that assessment, tree health, overall pretty good. We have the heater damages. We have tree grates that are causing issues. The soils are generally healthy. Utilities could be a possible threat in the future. When we start to project the health of these trees, so currently we have already lost 12% of our tree canopy. We're going to, based on the current assessment today, we're losing about 18% of our canopy. We're starting to see this decrease of our, this is our current condition. But when we look at projecting out 5 to 10 years, we project out another 5% loss. And then when you start to get into the 10 to 15 years, that's where you start to see significant drop off. The trees start to really decline, and you start to look at a very different downtown mall. You start to see, this is, if nothing happens, this is the trajectory of the downtown mall trees. And you're already seeing this today. So again, with and without. So here's where we get to our plan. Yep, go ahead.
Quick question. Sorry, since the willow oak's like the predominant tree, what's the average lifespan of a willow oak? Maybe, I guess, in an urban setting.
willow oaks in a open setting can grow, 150 plus years, but I think 80 years would be a pretty great tree.
Right.
In a very densely urban compacted setting. That would be a great scenario. So these trees, tight conditions, they haven't been pruned regularly. They've been pruned from a safety standpoint, but not to grow as a grove. These are probably 50 years.
Yeah.
As we're seeing.
And most of these were put in 76?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. A few.
So that's
later,
where your
but-
like your 10 to 15 year lookout is sort of, it's not just the, urban environmental conditions, but probably the life of that tree as
It's the current conditions of the trees and the current condition. We're seeing a lot of rapid decline, and the trees are not growing. Like their annual growth is not continuing to grow.
Gotcha.
So now they're kind of stable, but on the decline.
Right. Thanks, Paul.
So we looked at short-term fixes, things that can be done to address the tree grades, design recommendations, short-term projects, and then just general tree maintenance and best management practices. And then we have long-term, getting into how do we replace these trees once we get there. And then utility recommendations, tree selection, phasing, and then budgets. So start off with the short-term. Again, we'll look at these. So the tree grades. Here's the original design. You can sort of see these. And the future design is just a modified grade where if there is no impact to the current trees, we're just expanding that support beam to hold up that grate or future paving. If you have to, you can cut these and leave them in place as opposed to pulling them out and damaging the cambium, and then expanding that frame as well. So that's kind of one basic approach. You can also add in wrap barriers at this time. This is just a wire mesh that really we've done this in a lot of urban places, and it's quite successful for preventing that habitat space. And then also the lights are currently in the wrong location. These were moved in the 2009, but as that tree continues to expand, they will become more so problematic. So there's just a slight shift. That wiring is above grade, so not really an issue with the trees. This is another approach where you could return to the original design, removing the grate altogether. The grates have complications when they're cut. If they're cut, they have to be removed. If they're cut in place, they'll burn the cambium because of the process. So this pulls the grates away, and you need 2 men to do it. This is another approach where you go back to bricks. This is a foam, basically an rigid insulation foam that would hold the pavers up with the drainage aggregate around it. That would allow the pavers to kind of be pulled out manually, as well as the foam to not impact the tree in the future. So kind of one approach. And then the other approach is just the grate modification. So we only have the grate replacement to brick is shown in blue. That can only really happen in 2 zones, whereas the grate modification is really keeping with the grate itself, but just changing that. So we're not having a hodgepodge. We would only do all or the other in each one. From a historic design intent, we're going to look at 2 elements, the vegetation and the fountains. And the fountains aren't really our scope, but because they are integrated to the design integrity and they worked well from a design standpoint, we added these as well. So first, the bosks. Again, these are all willow oaks. But willow oaks have been great, but they have their own issues potentially with the threat of other things coming in. And you can see here the tree's intent was trees, clearly legible with the paving. This is not to say go back to all loose seating. We understand the value of the cafe zones, how they've really brought an economic engine to the downtown mall, and they are critical to the success of the downtown mall. Equally, maybe not as critical as the trees, but they are very critical. So we're not proposing to make any drastic changes to that scenario. But there are some conditions where you really want to see the trees. You want to be able to experience them as public space. And there are a few things that are really inhibiting that. The idea of potted trees or tall vegetation that are outside cafe zones, that they really screen trees and make it privatized public areas. Cafe fencing, granite countertops also do a similar thing where they block views to public areas. There are other types of fencing that are very transparent, very successful, and they're great. Some types of custom furnishings that wrap around trees and stuff also obscure the trees themselves and that experience of the groves and bosks. The fountains are equally impacted by these fencing, by the fencing that are shown up throughout the mall. Originally, these were activity spaces. Children, people are brought to these areas and engaging with the water. And you're also visually seeing the water, not only just hearing it. So you can see, sort of designed in current conditions. So you'll see cafe fencing is surrounding these. They're often in the middle of cafe zones now. So there's really no access to them, and often very obscured and lost as a design element of the mall. These are simple possibilities. A simple porous stainless grate that would allow water to move through, but you could walk up to it if you're concerned from an accessibility standpoint, although it's not an accessible issue in the current condition. But this would be one approach. This could be done with a simple metal grate over top of a beam supporting it, or you could just add metal edging as a wheel stop on the edges if you're concerned about it from a safety standpoint. These are two minor approaches. The main fountain itself, this area is off limits. You will be told to leave this area if you go anywhere over that chain by any Parks and Rec person, because I had that happen to me. But this is like a derelict space because, one, there's a derelict building next to it, but also because no one is allowed to engage with this fountain. It is off limits. And there's also trees on one edge. It's supposed to be the center of the mall, but instead it feels like the side and off limits. And so ways that you could, again, add a mesh grate over top of it so that it is accessible. You could have nosing that would notify you that it's an inaccessible surface. These are one approaches as opposed to just redoing the whole thing and lifting it up to surface, which would be nice too, but much more expensive. But these are relatively inexpensive approaches to changing fountain access. This is where we started to look at the seating zones themselves. And when we started to look at where seatings are, there were a few areas that stuck out. And primarily those dark orange areas with these extra large areas. These are 3 vendors that take up 17% of all the cafe spaces. And so these extra large areas also generally hide and obscure the fountains themselves. So these areas were of concern. And we started to look at each fountain, but also how we look at the trees, these enlargements of these areas. So thinking about, again, this is at Bizou here, this top corner here, Grit, Christians and such. So you would open up this central area so you could reveal the fountain. You could have cut-through space in here so you, again, visually see the fountain. Another approach at the central space that you would actually pull back some of these areas to reveal this first row of trees better, slightly reducing the amount of cafe space in those areas, but really maximizing this feeling of a public space here. Happening in front of the Paramount here, this is again opening up your views as you're walking down. Again, this is this long axis, this primary view spot right here that is right in front of Angelo's. And you could sort of see, you could also add space potentially here or right in front of Chaps, smaller space that are outside the fire lane to gain back any lost cafe space. And then finally, this is at D. This is at the Nook, or you can see how you open up that plaza again. Again, opening the fountains up as well as the trees that is internally.
Do you get blowback from the restaurants when you talk about this?
I mean, so far we haven't heard from the Friends of the Downtown and other groups that have been invited. No one has had any concerns with this. This is really trying to equalize the amount of spacing. It actually is a net loss of only 225 square feet, which is a really minimal. It's less than a vendor, typical vendor. So this is really trying to normalize the large, medium spaces as a standard and not the extra large spaces. So it's trying to balance the cafe seating while also opening up views into these. So we've had no concerns so far. There are some unique conditions. The Oaks at the Omni have some really poor soil conditions we'll look at. The Code Building Planter has some poor soils, obviously. There's a 7-tree grove, which has too much competition. The Central Place trees have their own issues. The Oaks at Ting Pavilion have some compaction issues. And then the Oaks at the Freedom of Speech Wall have some of the issues as well. So you'll see the canopy crowding here on the left. You could simply remove one of these trees to open up the canopy for other trees. You could also cover the soils with just mulch or chips to make it more visually appealing at the entrance to the mall. Looking at the poor soil quality, the short term is to adjust the plantings. This has already been done by Parks and Rec, putting in really water tolerant saturated soil plants. The other option is to replace the entire soils of this area and the plants, which is a much more expensive endeavor at this point. The Central Place trees, they have limited soil volume, generally compacted. This is again at the heart of the mall. So how you could sort of open up, add some more soil volume in these areas with uncompacted soils beneath the slab as an approach. And then modifying the tree grades. Some of these are girdling, and also you see some paving conflicts where they're starting to pop the pavers up. You can start to see there what's happening is there's actually a hidden grate beneath these pavers, but there's adventitious rooting coming underneath the pavers and popping these up. So this is just a matter of going in, pruning off the adventitious roots, and changing this detail just slightly to just to bring back mulch, and then removing that grate and those adventitious roots to reduce that heaving issue. These poor soils at Oak, at the Ting Pavilion, looking at ways to remediate the paver grades. Also, you can just thin 2 of the trees to better the canopies of the entire grove. They're already in poor shape, so it's a thinning approach. Also, an approach of adding mulch in these areas. It is impossible to grow grass as it is. Talking to the Ting Pavilion staff, adding mulch or arborist chips twice a year would be an approach to this. You could also think about adding some additional shade trees in here that wouldn't impact the long views as you see under these trees really clearly, but it's a critical desire for shade on this lawn in the summertime. So this is where that western light is coming. So just a slight change of the current conditions.
When you removed the trees, did you actually go down and remove the roots?
We haven't done this yet.
Okay.
We're proposing to do these, yeah. All proposed.
I think Jerry might be asking about the ones that are already removed.
Oh, the trees, no, we did not remove the roots. Just, they're all currently sculpted art out there. Yeah, so, yeah, yep. This is a standard approach for remediating old trees with radial trenching. This is where you use air spades to remove the soil and add in new soil to reinvigorate those roots with a compost soil mix and decompacting them. So it reduces compaction but adds nutrients for those trees. And you could see where those areas go and where the mulch goes. The compaction is so dense in these areas. So the mulch would actually help keep moisture in the soil as well as decompact those soils over time with more basically soil biology in those soils.
Are the trees needing additional watering other than what comes down, i.e. do the grates provide enough moisture for the trees?
Right now the slab is completely porous. It's been a drilled concrete slab beneath the pavers, so the mall is actually getting all the rainwater through the bricks and into the soils themselves. So it is sort of self-watering currently, but we would recommend if you replaced all of them, you would have an irrigation system knowing the stress of longer drought cycles and such that we're starting to experience and we will continue to experience. So currently there is no irrigation, but the water levels were all fine on an average condition in most places. We did a large tree maintenance manual with Keith Pitchford of our, really every single tree has a specific pruning regime and maintenance regime, looking at from cabling, structural pruning, removals, no pruning being a really critical one. These trees are old and older and mature, I should say, and they should not be casually pruned. Small tip ends and such, just leave them. They're not really a risk. You can see this is a large PDF, and we're not going to go through every single pruning, but really give specific examples of where to prune on each tree. This looks at potential recommendation for zoning. This is current conditions where you can see the light levels. The canopies get a lot of light, but once willow oaks, which are shade dominant, they are intolerant of shade, are planted in shade, they grow very, very slowly. Trees need light to thrive. And so when we see the current zoning approach, There are stepped zoning approaches that are already sort of being implemented, but you can see in pink the conditions on the mall that are currently in place. And so what's allowable plus compared to the current. So current building height allows light to these canopies to really thrive. The allowable would significantly change the amount of light levels, making a much darker mall and a less healthy environment for trees to thrive. There are examples of stepped buildings that are much more successful. You can see the code building is very successful at allowing light into the canopy of those trees by being stepped. Long-term recommendations. As we get into these long-term recommendations, we'll go through these different points. The poor health of the code building planter, just changing out those species in the maple areas. These are areas that stood out. So the goal is not to replace one tree at a time. The goal is to grow the trees together, one grove at a time. If you start to replace one tree at a time, you'll start to see one tree not doing well in shade, growing out to the side. You get an irregular growth rate and a really kind of funky looking mall. So it's not really the design intent. So these are examples. One way, you could just replace the soils and the trees in that 8x8 opening that's under the ground. That would be one really simple approach. Or a larger one that is replacing the entire soil volume with new soil. You're changing some utilities that are in conflict with the trees at the same time, as well as putting in irrigation and other things. So a larger, one is a long-term approach, one is a sort of mid-range approach. This is that example where you just literally take out the existing trees, put in new soil, put in new trees. These new trees, and this is the long-term approach of that slab replacement. You go in with a suspended slab system that would be on columns, that would be a porous slab as well, and an uncompacted soil for these trees to really thrive. This would be improved upon the current conditions and grow much healthier, longer-lived trees in the downtown mall. We recommend these sort of the middle tree here, the 6-inch caliper tree, is the right size to kind of create a sense of permanence at installation, but without becoming too onerous from a maintenance standpoint. As you get bigger, you need more water, a lot more care, and also delayed growth as those roots come out. And these are just, again, examples of those utilities. And so you can see if you did a lateral replacement currently, you'd be cutting off all of the roots on one side of that tree. So ways to think about that in place of cutting off these roots in that one lateral replacement. You could just have a requirement that says you have to be you have to be outside of 25 feet from any nearby tree to do any upsizing. Because when you upzone your building, the water line also needs to be upsized. So this is one of those conflicts.
And are you proposing putting willow oaks back in?
We'll get there in a second. Good question. This is a way that you could just push those main lines off to the side. Sorry to jump real quick. There's a lot to cover here, but hang with us. This is, if you did replace the entire area, you would move the water and gas lines off to the side. So you would basically have two mains. You would do this throughout the process to keep those out of the critical root zones. This is what relocating that would look like in that suspended slab scenario. So these are our two approaches: no lateral tie-ins within 25 feet, or shifting the entire gas line and water lines. When we looked at tree species, it was critical that it had drought tolerance. There's a lot of different factors: disease, urban tolerance, form, habit, lifespan, fruit drop. You don't want walnuts obviously dropping everywhere. Willow oaks have the smallest egg corn of any oak. It is really a magnificent urban tree for that reason. No one complains about them. But this is a major risk to have one species for the entire mall, knowing that we're, currently the beech leaf disease is taking out all of the beech trees in Northern Virginia. It's taking them out all throughout the state of New York. It's working its way down, like beeches are out. We already know our ash trees are gone. We already know our elm trees are majorly threatened. Like, this is a known threat by having one type of tree is a problem. So we did a spreadsheet because we're nerds, and we started to look at which ones were sort of good, better, best. And what we came up with was thinking about a red fall color tree in Central Place, the bald cypress, a good urban tree, tolerance more wet, compacted sites at the center with a strong fall color, as well as a mix of these kind of yellow, gold fall colors along in separate bosques along the mall itself. So still keeping willow oak, but also having cultivars of the American elm that are Dutch elm resistant, as well as the swamp white oak, and then the tulip poplar as the trees for the future. These are sort of examples of those trees and what they sort of look like in their color, very similar fall colors. So phasing standpoint, again, we did this by tree health and knowing there's sort of phase 1, 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years. Looking at phase 1, this is right at Central Place where we're already missing the trees. Easy place to start. There's also no businesses currently in that area that are, they're currently moving out, so it's a great time to invest in that area and reinvest in that area without much heartburn. The trees that are in front of the Jeff, that would be, they're in really poor shape as it is. It's a great, easy phase 1. So once this is successful, I think that really inspires phase 2. 10 years later, start to look at other areas where the trees are in poor shape. Right outside here, you'll see these trees are in quite poor shape outside the parking garage. And then slowly expanding. And I think the goal of these, to really tackle these over 20 years, is that as one grove is installed, it really starts to grow up and you start to have established shade once you're starting to remove other trees. We're not trying to ever have a condition where you have no canopy on the mall or no canopy for multiple blocks. The goal really is to have a consistent presence of trees and canopy throughout its time, and that by the time you're sort of starting to develop this next generation, the trees have all grown together, and this would, ideally last for another, 80 years total, plus. There's also ways to transition the spaces and recommendations that really celebrates each block as it's being replaced by allowing light in, different art that could really celebrate them all and reinvigorate it, even while you're replacing trees, changing that condition. So sort of quick images of what that might look like. So, how you fund this? We have things that maybe are from the general fund with great modifications, cafe seating updates, maintenance one, maybe that's general fund, maybe that, depending how large it is, BMP recommendations and such. Then other things that are in the CIP budget for the phasing and the side streets. And so that's a lot. That's a ton. We have a whole section on the costs of all this, which is another 12 pages, but I would like to stop and just sort of get some questions. Why don't your seats?
So what if I can, when I talked to Paul,
Do you want the hot seat?
yeah, he said, well, you want me to take 10, 15 minutes and 10 minutes for questions? No. We're gonna take an hour or plus. So, one, it's the third time I've seen it, and I learn something every time. And Breck keep by, and so, Paul, you're certainly getting comfortable doing it. So one, yes, if you all have any questions, but the plan is in October to be taking this to City Council. So,
Actually, September now.
this is, okay. So, if there's some hard questions, some rough edges that need to be smooth. This is, so in some ways, trying to prepare this for council or things that, were unclear or not. So the designers in the room that went to, sat through presentations were made to cry by your professors. Paul's used to that. So, I think, working towards, as in the architecture school when they would yell at each other, or not yell, but to offer Paul some comments that would help in the BAR, or in City Council, anticipating some of the tough questions. I want to encourage that as well, and something that is going to lead to our discussion in September, because I wanted to talk about the mall, the cafe spaces tonight, but flip this around. But when Paul spoke a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about it today, was that that visibility through the mall and how things are beginning to encroach on that. The umbrellas, that the solid wall of the cafe spaces. We're seeing the plants that are, the little mini hedges that are being put up. So it's not to discuss now, but it definitely is something that will feed into our discussion, I hope, in September as well. And I think the last thing I'd say is, you talked about Central Place at the last presentation and really stressed that that was, intended as the town square kind of place, and that's been lost, and that really stuck in my head. So with that, please, I'll hand it over to you all to.
So, Paul, just don't want to say right off the bat, thank you very much. That was very informative, and also thank you for all the work your firm has put into this. It's a very long effort, and we appreciate it. So, that I just want to get out the way.
Thank you.
But yeah, open it up to all sorts of general discussion and questions and comments.
I have a question, maybe more for City than for Paul. Why did we never replace the trees that are in front of the Tyvek Tower, the Central Fidelity Bank? I mean, those have sat there.
Yeah.
And in the summer, it's especially brutal. There's no shade, and you just, because of the wonderful tree canopy throughout the rest of the mall, you arrive at that place, which is near the central focal point of the mall, and it's just noticeable that you have no canopy at all. I just would love to know why the city is, even if that's been 15 years now that those died. I think I think they died before the bank closed, honestly. And before all of that.
I think they lasted so briefly that I don't even know if I recall that there were trees there. But I think the answer I could give moving forward is, as Paul pointed out, that's an area of low-hanging fruit that
Right.
could be addressed, and so.
Pun intended.
Yeah, I did mean it that way, but yeah, I honestly, I don't even remember when the trees were there, and they just seemed to slowly die one by one, so it was.
They did.
Yeah.
I watched them.
Yeah.
I can say a little bit to that, and I don't remember if it was exactly those trees, but there have been times, at least in my tenure on the board, when the city came and was concerned about trees coming down, asked about replacing them, and there was a really not a really thought out way of responding, like what tree would go in there, what detail would you use, is this consistent with the Halpern design? So the work that Paul's firm is doing is kind of an outgrowth of that kind of lack of having a larger vision, and I think we finally have now a very clear-eyed, sober assessment of what's happening and a comprehensive look of how to move forward. I wouldn't say that the city hasn't wanted to do things there. They just haven't had the time or ability to look at this in a really big scale to decide how to move forward in a thoughtful way.
Yeah, and also during 2009, I know that there was some concern from Beth Meyer and other people at University of Virginia that were concerned about what species was going to be replaced with. Like maples were so critical to the design as being red. Like, who's going to pick another tree species? The maples have failed twice.
Right.
What's a red one? So like, it just felt like, oh, who's going to do that? I think that was another reason why. The uncertainty, the trees all failed. Why are they failing? Should we do an assessment of the soils and all that? And there are some soil issues too, so.
I'm a bean counter, so you skip the 12 pages of what it's gonna cost.
Right.
God,
Can
we
you
have so many
give
cares about
a
cost here.
Just rough estimate on phase 1, 2, 3?
Right. There's, as a rough estimate, it's about $1 million if you're doing just the tree and the soil replacement. That's sort of like option one, the low budget option that just says, just replace the trees. That's about $1 million a phase. And then it's about $3 million a phase if you're, changing out the entire slab. So it adds, an additional amount. So that's, and then that doesn't, there's another $1 million in, grate and tree maintenance and other things too. That's just like base elements. So
I think kind of to Jeff's point or Jeff's question in terms of preparing for city council, that's going to be one of the main things they ask about.
Right.
So I would, it makes sense not to necessarily have a bunch of slides for us prepared, but definitely have some good slides for.
They're prepared.
On the
If you want
budget.
them, I'm happy to go
Okay.
through them, but I want to respect your all's
No,
time.
no, I
Yeah.
appreciate that, but like Jeff said, thinking about what city council is going to want to hear about, that's definitely going to be a big part of it, I think. So, and I've not having seen the sides, like pros and cons to which approach, and maybe even like, I guess one question that I had was, you said you've got the sort of two options of replacing the slab or not. Can you pick and choose per area? I can't remember grove or whatever, right? Like, or do you have to choose option 1 to do the whole mall or option 2 to do the whole mall?
You'll see disproportionate growth rates. So your trees will not sort of grow at the same growth rate. You'll have limited sort of, the trees over time will have shorter lifespans likely if you don't replace all those soils. Like we're trying to plan for, not a 50-year tree cycle, but like a 80 to 100-year tree cycle. Like in that replacement, you're planning for the longer health of those groves by the more expensive option, essentially.
Okay.
So if you did every other, you would start to see that in those trees.
Okay.
And some species, like the tulip poplar, we wouldn't recommend in option 1 because that just doesn't do well in those really compacted soils of the urban conditions. So we might change that one out, but anyway, that kind of.
Yeah, no, I just think you might want to speak to that.
Yep.
To help explain that sort of, spending a little bit more now, it's going to pay off down the road later.
Right.
Last time when Paul presented, I said that every other slide should be, and this is going to cost money and require a long-term commitment. And Lloyd Snook was sitting next to me. But the thing that I think we should really make stark and understand is that there isn't, well, there is a we can do nothing. And the result of that, and I'm, does this communicate a stark enough view of that? And then I think one of the questions I could foresee coming back to you all, we talk a lot about the canopy size. So is it creating shade? I mean, for example, can we just put in one big tree that creates a lot of shade, or is the design the odd numbered? Yes. So that's something I could see coming, the BAR being asked to comment on, or might be necessary to comment on. So I just wanted to put that out there.
One of the things at the beginning, you said there were X number of malls, urban malls that got started, and only 43 are still going. Do we know what it was that killed off the other malls, and why this one
Norfolk was one.
and these other were successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think suburbia is definitely one of those things. People left cities, and sort of abandoned them. But also, I think the design of a static mall, the scale of the buildings really played into it. I think it's, the idea of the way these bosques shift. Each block is unique. Each one creates its own feeling and presence as you're walking along this. Meanwhile, if you had just a straight row of trees, it would just kind of be this tedious place. So I think there's something really beautiful about the Charlottesville one that really stands out from other ones that I visited and other ones that have been removed.
I would like to offer that what saved the downtown mall here was basically it becoming a wonderful food court. That essentially the proliferation of cafes plus the movie theater basically revived the mall. In the first 20 years or so, it was basically dead.
Once the trees got tall enough, too, some would
Right.
argue
No, I'm
that
not
was
discounting the trees.
Right, no,
but-
absolutely.
But,
yeah.
but if you did not have people outdoors enjoying the food and
Definitely.
creating a crowd safety feel to it, it would not work.
Including
Even if you had beautiful trees.
Including the ice park, I would say.
The ice park was helpful.
Yeah.
Yep.
If I can add, my opinion about one of the successes in the downtown mall is that it never became a location for franchised or nationalized restaurants or stores. And we've had only a few exceptions. Boulder, Pearl Street is really similar to us, but there are so many national franchises and national stores there. And I've always, I was on a on a City of Charlottesville delegation that actually flew up to Boulder to look at their great example, and we came back and thought ours is better. And we really thought we'd learn lessons from them, because ours was still struggling. This is 20 years ago, but, you know.
You know, one of the things, as I understand it, the buildings have by right the ability to go to 9 stories
Currently, yep.
currently. So if somebody took one and went up, that is seriously going to be affecting these trees.
And that would, yeah, definitely. Especially if something like the flats, or, you know, like a major development that would, a wall, of, you know, if a single skinny building went up tall, that might impact some trees, you know, but a larger shade study would really have to be done to sort of assess, you know, the impact of one building, say, versus, you know, an entire block.
Just to clarify your diagram a little bit, the BAR is I think allowed to require a 25-foot step back, correct? I'm pretty sure on downtown mall that was specifically put in our purview.
I think so, yeah, and then
25 isn't going to do it, but sorry.
They are allowed to, yeah.
So, another piece of this, I talked to Paul, but only briefly, I still need to figure out how to do it, is it's not just downtown. I mean, we have trees on West Main that are in bad shape.
Yes.
We have 10-story buildings that could be built on West Main. So this is not just about, you know, we want to be the city of trees, but yet we have a zoning ordinance that allows a city of shade, or at least artificial shade. So a question I had for Paul, and not for tonight, but was, all right, should we, looking at our design guidelines, should we model some things that inform us in how we would approach a discussion with council about this? Or should we establish some criteria to, as a project comes in, we evaluate it? I don't know the answer to that. And I don't know what it would take to do that relative to cost. But I think it is necessary that we understand what these heights mean. And again, the BAR can say something has to be this. The city council gets ultimate decision. So it's a value to do it. I need to figure out how to do it. But I am very concerned, and I'm not just concerned about 10-story buildings on the mall. There are other places, even an 8-story building on, you know, JPA or something may impact what we want to accomplish with tree cover.
I am curious about the code trees. They weren't planted by the city, were they?
The code building.
The code building, right, sorry, code building trees, that plaza there, I don't,
That was just a basic requirement, as I understand it, that
Okay.
they said you just have to replace what you take out
I
and
see.
put it back, and they just didn't put it back the exact same.
I see, okay. But it's now the city's responsibility.
And what is your time frame that you would like to see phase 1 get started in?
I'd like to see it start right away. I mean, because you have to, you know, ideally, in 5 years from now, it's built. You know, that would be the idea. So you work back a year for construction, you know, coordination and such, and bidding. Then you have to get the funding for it. You know, so, you know, there should be a discussion in the next few CIP cycles that says, how are we paying for this? That would be, so that is really the incentive is, while there's no tenants there, and while there's no real people, you know, while it looks like it currently does, let's inspire the next generation of trees.
Do you think there's going to be a lag time? So you've got a 50-year plan, and it sounds like a lot of the trees are kind of at their climax right now. So is there a situation that might occur where things just kind of decline quickly in the next 20 years, and then we're left with like that 20, 30, 40 year in the future where everything's kind of back to the way it was in the 1970s?
We were trying to, that one slide is a little confusing because you have like a 50-year, that's like the full completion, but really we have a 20-year goal. Like our goal is 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you're done. Like that would be the ideal scenario. I could see a situation where you get to the 15-year mark and you're like, these trees look great. Let's not take them out yet. You know, like, we're not trying to really tear out healthy trees. We're just tackling the ones that are in poor shape, and then they're just, you're ready to start anew. So I think ideally 20 years, but that could stretch to 25 years or so. So there might be some flexibility. We haven't put that in here because we're really hoping it's a quick process.
Yeah.
But it just depends on how it's
And
funded.
the trees that are now sculptures that you've cut down, are they planned to be removed?
Yes, the sculptures could be saved and put somewhere else, but we would recommend new trees planted there, the roots removed and replanted. There's only 2 places where we'd recommend not planting a tree, and that's where that 7-tree bosque is. We would just suggest that goes down to 5 trees to allow more light to that condition.
So the original plantings, for the most part, were the willow oaks, and then y'all are proposing to have a variety of like 5 or 6, 7 tree species. Of those species, do they grow like at
Similar
relatively-
growth rates?
Yeah.
We chose trees that grew at similar growth
Okay.
rates, had similar forms, upright forms, really not low branches, and tried to keep a diverse mix
Yeah.
from a threat standpoint as
Gotcha.
well.
Okay, yeah. you
But yeah,
covered-
we want to have
you
them
were asking-
look visually the same as much as we possibly can. So straight, clear trunks, high canopies, very similar to these trees.
And are you trying to stop people putting the propane heaters around the trees?
Well, when we first presented this to council, you know, after we did our initial assessment, that was like our initial concern. And right away, there was an ordinance written, and that you had to have a 10-foot spacing from any tree with a heater. So I think it's a penalty at first, then you lose your license if it happens twice. So that has been implemented, and that's in place.
I have maybe you thought about this, or maybe it's in the information about the budgeting, but I wonder if while doing this exercise, if part of the budgeting could include what it would look like to have an endowment established, that so we start to protect annual maintenance and upcoming improvements, so that it's kind of baked in and we don't have to rely on the budget cycles of future generations to maintain these trees. I don't know what that looks like, but I could imagine that might be an interesting way to start a conversation about either private, public-private partnership to kind of like really put this in a good place for the future.
That sounds similar to what the Central Park Conservancy, for example, in New York City. That sounds like a great idea if they could work out something like that. So.
Yeah, I'll have to see if we can create, I don't think our cost estimator ever wants to talk to us again. They had like such a low number on this project, and I still like paying them to call them. So maybe there is a way, though, that could be, we have some ad service money or something like that we could help.
Perhaps the Friends of the Downtown Mall could sort of activate that kind of process and create such a foundation like the Central Park Conservancy.
Terrific.
Just a thought.
It's a great idea.
idea.
How much of the current tree decline do you think is a result of the laterals that you were talking about?
Currently, there's been no lateral replacement. I just know that they're proposing one at what's it called now? The glass elevator building down the way. They're going to. Yeah, and so when they upzone those, they have to change out the water line to a larger size.
Yeah.
So that's where we got the sort of tip off from utilities. Like, oh yeah, we're just going to replace all those laterals, and whenever you change the zoning, we always upsize the pipes, and that's where we're like, oh, well, you know how invasive that is. So currently, there's none have had that happen to them. It's just more of a risk in the future. So if you're planning for the long term, large trees, ideally you'd move those out. But not currently an issue.
At the current time, none of the roots have disturbed the utilities.
Correct.
That's pretty amazing.
Well, willow oaks are really a fine-rooted species. They don't have really invasive roots, so that is one of those benefits of the tree itself. And the soils have a lot of room, actually, surprisingly, for the roots to move around in. So I think it really helps too that they shifted the water and the gas lines that are in the higher areas off to the side, so they're not close to those trees either. And then you have the sand and sewer and stuff real low, and yeah, so the location's actually pretty good. It's just the laterals, and if you have to upsize them, that's the problem.
I was happy to see that you did include the fountains. It's a particular bugaboo of mine. And you kind of, I kind of got the hint, that the idea that you're hinting that the railings around the fountains were put there by the cafes. They were not. They were put there by the Parks and Rec.
Yes. Sorry if I didn't clarify
Sorry.
that. Yes, they were. I'm making a recommendation that's not related to trees, but how you
I thoroughly
really.
endorse your recommendation.
Thank you.
And that's where another place I think BAR's voice is going to become really important, is that, I mean, there's, as we know, I hear all the time, oh, the BAR wouldn't let us do this or wouldn't let us do that, and it's pure fiction, but you all are viewed as stewards of the mall, stewards of the design. And so there are certain things, and this is what's, struck me with Paul talking about it a couple weeks ago, is that visual clutter. And Sherry and I and Kate walked on the mall before the meeting, and just, where things have started to intrude into that space. Yeah, the cafe railings are an ABC requirement, but, maybe they should be more open, or this is where it's not a tree and when to do it and how much will it cost, but there are some visual issues on the mall that you have a very prominent role in, and hopefully we'll discuss that in September. But I'm glad, because you'd asked what made the mall successful. I think something unique about Charlottesville in that it understands and respects this is a designed landscape. This is something special. And the other thing I've noticed in my 30 years is the lights in apartments in the upper floors. You didn't used to see that, people occupying those spaces. So yeah, it's a number of things, but I do think there's a lot of folks that recognize the integrity of that design. But as we go forward, we'll have to, hopefully the BAR will be able to remind people of, yes, it's important that those fountains are accessible, things like that. But I think the one thing, again, I would go back to is the opportunity. There is no do-nothing strategy here, and I don't know if, I worry that we won't communicate that. I'd say that as a city resident, as city staff, and staff for BAR, but the idea that, well, we'll just let it keep going, because I think my first week on the job, I think Beth told me to call you, or maybe Breck told me to call you. You and I walked the mall, and I saw the mall in a completely different way. But here we are, almost, over 6 years later, and we're still talking about we need to do something, we need to have a plan. So I'm concerned this is just going to get kicked down the road. And I will offer that in 2 years, on July, I think 4, is the 50th anniversary of the ribbon cutting of the mall. So it would be terrible if our trees look like heck. So do you all, any other comments, suggestions? Do you have anything for the BAR that might be helpful for you going forward?
No, I mean, I'll know that I'll reemphasize the need for this and also emphasize the cost and the investment for city council. I mean, I think those are great recommendations, and then also look into the endowment idea. And, so those are all, key recommendations we can add into the report and also the presentation to council.
Well, I've told Paul this at other times, but I think this has been excellent work. It's added a lot to the Downtown Mall Committee's deliberations, and I think I can't think of a better kind of thorough study that help us in doing our work to protect the design integrity of the downtown mall. So I would love to find a way to support the proposal or the presentation, to City Council in any way that you guys see appropriate. I think that I'm glad that that this study was funded, and that you guys have done so well, and hopefully it just kicks right into action.
Yeah, I mean, can we draft a letter and then circulate it at least by email between now and the city council meeting to then be able to send along as sort of, here's the BAR support of this endeavor. I think that would be
I mean, and I think
a good idea.
you all have the ability to go sort of beyond you don't have to get into details, but you certainly can emphasize the necessity of doing something and the necessity of committing to something long-term and stressing that. I mean, I know it's stating the obvious, but I think it would have value for council to
Yeah.
hear that.
Well, I think there's also something to be said that, like, you know, the success of a place like the downtown mall ultimately is people, right? And inspiring people to occupy that space. And if it's grown into this beautiful place, and if we let it fail, people won't come anymore. And then city council, you'll start seeing an economic downfall in your city center. So I think that's also something that could be emphasized to city council.
All right, well, thank you, Paul, and
Yes.
I just wanted to touch on
So
September
why
quickly.
don't we, I mean, writing a letter is nice, but why don't we, could we take action tonight and just endorse this plan
Certainly,
by
yeah.
vote? And
Yeah.
that seems like it's something that we can do and it's powerful and it's a message to council rather than a letter that, you know, we're gonna edit to death or not have time to review or whatever as we leave here with our busy schedules. I don't mean to be cynical, but we're at this place where we have
Absolutely,
adjourned.
yeah, sure. What's our right wording?
So I'll make a motion that we.
Great, go for it.
That we adopt the recommendations of Wolf Josie, with regard to, the phased plan for care of the trees and other elements of the downtown mall. I'm open to any friendly amendments or extensions of that.
Just change the word adopt to support.
Oh, support, yes.
Endorse.
Yeah,
Endorse, sure.
something like that.
Anybody want to add anything else more wordy?
Let's see.
Or focus
I mean, I
on-
think,
I mean, if somebody wants to say something about the
I don't know if we
fountains, for example.
have a way of saying urgency in there, that we feel like city council needs to move.
That we had, I think we endorsed that they adopted imminently. Kate's getting this down, I know she is.
Hey, that's all, as long as our microphones work, we'll get it.
Oh, sorry, mine is, and I didn't have mine on, so I apologize, Remy.
I mean, I would say because
He's
it's
used
not
to that.
a formal COA.
I know, bad.
It could be something we draft up and easily circulate and everybody sign off on. I mean, I don't think you need the formality of a motion necessarily.
Sherry just
but you
made
sh-
one, should we?
Well, then repeat
yeah,
it.
it'd be nice to.
I like the formality of a motion.
Yeah.
I think
so-
I think it's the way we act. I don't think we act through letters or opinions or, this is what we do.
That's right.
I mean, it's the only way we can act in concert, and I do think it's, again, a pretty powerful way of expressing ourselves. I'm not saying that somebody can't write a very eloquent letter and, you know, we could do that too. I don't mean to say that to exclude that, but.
So how about, Charlottesville Board of Architectural Review would like to express its sincere thanks to Wolf Josie and support of their proposed preservation plan for our National Historic Landmark downtown mall, and would like action taken on this
Imminently.
imminently.
Is that, are you replacing?
How about urgently?
Is that a new motion?
I'm
So I'll withdraw
rewriting
my
yours.
motion and I'll second Mr. Zemer's. How about that?
There you go.
But how about urgently is better?
Urgently, urgently.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Well,
Well.
let me flip it. Like, we hope the city council takes sincere interest into the September presentation, the forthcoming September presentation, and takes action thereupon. I don't know.
I think, you know. so
We can
what-
clean up the language.
Yeah, this is
Are you talking about a
helpful.
letter or a motion? I just want to make clear.
Motion.
Okay.
But we'll-
What I heard is that, you know, the BAR is, you know, expressing thanks to Wolf Josie for their work and in support of I would say, implementing the proposed phasing plan
For preservation of our historic landmark,
National Historic Landmark.
National Historic Landmark Mall and its trees.
Well,
Done.
is it maintenance plan or is it a preservation plan? Okay.
Maintenance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Management
yeah.
plan.
That's even better.
There we go.
Management implies perpetuity.
Yeah.
Can we say then at that point that the BAR understands the urgency of the situation, recommends swift action?
That's it, thank you.
Excellent.
I'll accept that friendly amendment.
And may I politely and the commitment to long-term, I feel like that's critical. That This is not a one and done.
Swift action and to commit to long-term maintenance of this important city.
Execution on the plan. Are we at a discussion phase now? We've had a motion and amendments.
Have we
and
heard a second?
Second.
There we go, there's a
Just
second.
back to
Now we can
the,
get
back to the letter
discussion.
versus motion thing. I think letters are nice, but I feel like
We're
the
making a
BAR
motion.
doing a letter is almost where we don't want to act. I feel like it's a lesser powerful thing to council.
We're taking action right now.
I know.
I think that we are
I know.
also
I just want to
all
explain why I've pushed for this.
free to come to the city council
you.
meeting and speak.
Thank you
as
for
well.
discounting
And I
my
agree.
opinion.
And it will be, you know.
Quiet now
again,
and
it's
leave
not a
the thing.
COA, so I can make sure that I've got it correctly. But a motion was made, it was seconded, and was anybody opposed to that motion?
Take a vote.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Perfect, perfect.
The motion carries. Ms. Lewis, thank you.
Okay, so, thank you, Paul. You need me to get rid of your disc, or do I add it to my collection? I did save it. Just preparing for next month, and the discussion about the cafe spaces, and, oh, you can, yeah, because.
He's only got 3 minutes, it's fine.
Yeah.
There are things that are required, again, by ordinance. There are things that are required by the ABC requirements, and I will find out about those, and I will communicate that to you all. What I want you all to be cognizant of, and I'll send something out, some illustrations, images, but I don't want to limit your observations to just what I've taken photographs of. But there's been a proliferation, particularly in the last month or two on the mall, of things outside of those cafe spaces. Now, if Craig in zoning says, well, those things can't be there, I can solve that. But the question is, well, where someone has a planter box outside of a railing, are we okay with the planter box if it's inside the railing? We've never talked about that. Or an idea that, based on some of what Paul was saying about that visual clutter, are if people put in plants that are the height of the cafe spaces, that's one thing, but once they start creating these artificial hedges, is that, you know, visually, it's something I could control from the BAR perspective, because cafe spaces are reviewed. I review them administratively. So when you're out and about on the mall, and the things that would be entirely in your wheelhouse, we say things like furniture should be either silver or black. There's some mall furniture that's, I don't know, like a brown, like a Trex material. There's some, there's places that have 2 different colors of umbrellas. I don't have a problem with that, but our ordinance says it should be 1 color. So there's some things that we could say, you know, people are doing that and we're fine with it. Those planters they have 10 different pots. We're okay with that. Or is uniformity important? Another thing, you see a lot of furniture that's sort of migrated onto the cafe spaces, you know, these tall, you know, waiting stations. Again, that's within the cafe space. That's within our guidelines to address. We've written a policy about the catenary lights. I think I'm in pretty good shape with that. I mean, we all know where if somebody's putting a pole on their cafe space, don't wrap it in electrical tape, do it neatly. So, it's just some of those things where it's in the guidelines, but are the guidelines wrong? Can they be adjusted? And then there are things where there's nothing in the guidelines. What could we or should we adopt to address those? So just over the next month, give it some thought, and I welcome a lively discussion in September. Any questions for me?
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all very much.
We adjourn on time. Thanks, everybody.
Was that